Check two. Hello. Two. Hello. Well, I don't know what's going on today. We're having a little trouble. We're having a little trouble today, I guess. Not sure what's up with that. I did just restart my computer. I did see that I had some updates to do when I restarted, which I haven't done. Perhaps that might be causing some issues. I don't know. This one's a bit of a struggle. Just so we're all clear, I wasn't behind this. Okay, thank you. Thank you for making that clear. I wasn't sure. Not sure why you'd ask. I was kind of wondering, honestly, so. Sean also not behind it. I'm in it, Rob. My advice would be to not shut down your computer while you're streaming. Okay, I will keep that in mind for future reference. How many times did I tell you, Mom, you can't make a call while I'm using dial-up to play RuneScape? Exactly. Someone else in my household was using the internet to play Farmville. I believe it was. We got some big Farmville heads over here. Remember that? Remember when everyone was into Farmville? I know. Oh, anyway, I don't know if I said thank you to Joe110 for the 13 months. Thank you, Joe110. I gotta tell you, it's hard to get into any kind of a rhythm here when the stream keeps crashing. I don't know what's going on with that. Maybe I gotta update my Streamlabs something. I do not know. I'm not sure. Anyway, are you still with me, chat? Are you still with me? You know, my uncle used to send me Farmville invites. I should have accepted them. Now he's posting fascist AI memes on Facebook. That sounds of the Farmville to fascist AI slop pipeline is very real. It's very real, and some of our friends and family members are on that trajectory if they're not all the way at the other end already. Is this really Rob, or was he replaced? I got body snatched. Got body snatched. Remember that? Anyway, as I was saying, I don't know how much that got caught before I got cut off there. But Alexandro had brought up this idea of like anti-Semitism versus philo-Semitism, and I wanted to recommend a piece by M. Cohen, which I think is really enlightening about this concept of philo-Semitism and the way that it's kind of used very cynically in kind of Western culture. The piece is called "The Only Way Out Is Through" by M. Cohen. It's on Medium. I'm going to link it in the chat right now. And I recommend that you read it. Am I still here? Did I get cut off again? Because if so, I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to go. I'm just going to go away. You're muted. I'm not muted. I should say as well, if you do, who knows how much longer the stream's going to be on the air. I keep getting taken down. You're not muted. I know Barbie had JIT problem. People are always trying to mess with me. People are always the chat does a bit where they like to pretend that I'm muted just because just a few times in the 4 years that I've been doing this show, a few times I've accidentally spoken with my microphone on mute, and now to this day I have to deal with every single day all kinds of gaslighting and misinformation about whether I'm muted or not. They don't know the struggle. No, they don't. Shy Divey Die subs, and the next thing you know, Rob's streams get blown up and muted. Yeah, who knows what's going on with that? Some kind of sinister plot. But again, please do read this piece by M. Cohen in Medium. It's called The Only Way Out Is Through. I do recommend that. I should mention that, like, who knows how much longer I'm going to be able to do this? Is the stream going to crash again? I don't know. Is it being taken down by some kind of nefarious sources? CSIS or Mossad or the CIA or the NSA or the FBI or whoever? We don't know who it is. We don't know. It could just be a simple programming error on my computer, or there could be something more sinister going on. My point is, we don't know what's going on. But if you do want to make sure that you subscribe and help support this show before that happens again, please do so if you can.
You can count on me.
As you know, folks, the only way that I'm able to continue doing this show each and every day is if this little number at the bottom of the screen goes up. I got to try and make this little number at the bottom of the screen go up every single day of my life that I do this program. So who knows if it's going to be your last chance? Maybe I'm going to be taken off the air today or maybe even permanently. We don't know. But if you do want to support this show, like Diego has shown so much support over the years, thank you, Diego, aka Comrade Social Distancing. Thank you for the gifted sub and for all the support. If you do want to support this program and help keep it on the air and support the work that I do here on Twitch and elsewhere, please subscribe if you can. It's $5 a month. It's totally free of charge. If you have an Amazon Prime account, you can use that to subscribe. Completely free of charge. Well, not free because you're paying, but you're paying the Amazon Prime. So you're already getting stuff in exchange for that. And I'm giving you something in exchange as well, as we talked about. Okay, this is not just a one-way street. I'm on here each and every day, 3-4 hours a day, trying to provide some kind of community, entertainment, analysis, insight. Sometimes it's just a little bit more silly, whatever it is, entertainment. And the only way that I'm able to do that, folks, is if people support the program and subscribe. So if you do enjoy this show and being part of the community, etc., please subscribe if you can. I suspect it's the NHL taking down a popular Canadian that doesn't like hockey. I think that could be it as well. That's the thing. We don't know. We don't know who it was, who or what is responsible for this stream being interrupted on now multiple occasions today. We just don't know. Red Wizard says analtainment. That's analysis and entertainment rolled up into one. Really rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? And even saying rolls off the tongue after that is a little... It's going to move on from that little gag. One thing is for sure, Rob has a lot of enemies, which is weird because I'm a total nice sweetie, as everyone knows, but I don't know, for some reason, I don't know, this kind of... I don't know, don't ask me to explain it. You can use cloud points to pay your rent. Rob matches them dollar for dollar from his CPC funding. If only. I would be happy to get funding from the CPC because then I wouldn't have to ask you, Chad. Believe me, I'd much prefer that. I would much prefer to go with one of these more official sources than to have to, pass around this digital hat or collection plate. There's no logical explanation. There's no logical explanation for any of this, Dr. Maggot.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Perfect Speller, thank you very, very much for 5 gifted subs. That's very kind of you. Thank you for that. Very much appreciated. Thank you for supporting this program and for being part of this community. Very, very cool. Thank you for that. And once again, if anyone else would like to also support this program, there is still an opportunity to do so. And then I can move on and talk about some more serious business. And I got a couple of good things here. I'm just queuing up. See, this is how I know I didn't actually misspeak just now, because now multiple people have accusing me of saying different things. Dr. Maggot says MF said opportunity, and Joe110 says, did this MF just say opportunity? So I think you're both mistaken. I think I was speaking totally properly. I think you both got it wrong, actually. If we average out the complaints, Rob did nothing wrong. Thank you, Sean. Sean, thank you for speaking on my behalf. Thank you. I appreciate that. He's at Joe Mantegna, classic character actor. Joe Mantegna. Okay, I'm gonna try. It's really hard to have a serious discussion when I keep getting disconnected and the stream crashing. And thank you, Professor Shaminator, for sharing this in the chat as well. This Parapraxis magazine, Elements of Anti-Semitism. This is all really useful stuff, and I would like to have a more lengthier discussion about this. Coming up on the show, which I would like to do. These are concepts that I've tried to understand and talk about and articulate over the years, but I think there's been a couple of these pieces that have come out lately that have really crystallized a lot of these ideas that have been very helpful for me, and I think they'd be very helpful for you as well. I did want to read just a portion of this. This is from the piece that I mentioned, The Only Way Out is Through by M. Cohen. About this concept of philosemitism, and it really helps to understand how the West uses these concepts. That is what is preventing the serious conversation. It is, Max. I'm trying to be serious here. But let's. I'm going to read this section here. And this has been really helpful for me to understand a lot of things about the way the concept of anti-Semitism is used in the West. It says, not to be confused with the opposite of anti-Semitism. Philosemitism is the basis of post-Holocaust white Euro-American identity formation vis-a-vis treatment of the Jews, where white Euro-America resurrects itself as the protector of Jews. Through defining itself as a society that has defeated anti-Semitism, always proclaiming its commitment to fight anti-Semitism, and defining other societies and oppressed groups within white Euro-America as producers of anti-Semitism, White Euro-America absolves itself for its past and present and future crimes and creates justification for its various colonial and imperialist projects, now in the name of the Jews. Huria Butleja perfectly explains how this plays out in state racism and philosemitism, or how to politicize the issue of anti-racism in France. According to her, philosemitism serves to, quote, soothe the whites' conscience and turn the Shoah into a new civil religion by stripping it off of all its historicity. Commemorating the Shoah equals, in a way, to a full and final settlement of all claims. The state pays its debt to the Jews and buys a new moral probity, but in doing so it generates a memorial discrimination, since, while using the memory of the genocide of the Jews as a political tool, it conceals the memory of the slave trade, which upsets the Afro-West Indian communities. It conceals the memory of colonization, which upsets the Muslim, Arab, and the African communities. It conceals the memory of the genocide of the Roma, which upsets the Roma community and brings about resentment against the Jews, who are rightly considered as the, quote, sweethearts of the Republic. Philosemitism represents not a shift away from or an abandonment of Nazism, but its post-Holocaust evolution. Both anti-Semitism and philosemitism work by maintaining the status of Jews as a perpetual other against which white Euro-America defines itself. And it is this perpetual other status that makes the growth of violent anti-Semitism, for example via conspiracy theories, not just possible, but inevitable. In other words, philosemitism is built upon and invariably produces anti-Semitism. Philosemitism cannot exist without anti-Semitism. And while not all anti-Semitism is philosemitic in nature, all philosemitism is anti-Semitic. On the dangers of fighting anti-Semitism, I describe how the shift in white Euro-America from hegemonic anti-Semitism to hegemonic philosemitism has created a dynamic where, quote, fighting anti-Semitism today does not refer to the act of protecting Jews or working toward a world that is safe for Jewish people, but of pushing forward Zionism in particular and global white supremacy in general. Understanding this, we can see why efforts to fight anti-Semitism seem to always lead to increasingly unstable and unsafe realities for marginalized people. For instance, fighting anti-Semitism has been invoked by those seeking to get rid of bail reform, by those seeking to cleanse their universities of black, brown, Arab, indigenous, Muslim, and radical students and professors, by those seeking to give the police and military more money, by those seeking to put more cops in black neighborhoods, by those seeking to rationalize and justify imperialist military campaigns. Fighting anti-Semitism has been invoked by those working to shut down left-leaning political campaigns, by those pushing for censorship of radical and leftist political expression in general, and by those pushing for an expansion of racist border policies. Fighting anti-Semitism has also, for the past 8 months and 75 years, been invoked to justify, to enable, and to participate in the colonial fascist Zionist genocide in Palestine. I don't want to read this entire piece, but again, I would really recommend that people read it. It's really valuable, and it's helped me understand this concept a lot more. These are things that we've all been kind of grappling with and wrestling with. I mean, I think that anyone that paid attention to the Corbyn campaign, going on almost a decade ago, was aware about how this was like very cynically employed to destroy a like very popular left-wing movement, which in reality, as we've talked about a number of times, was not this big radical thing. It was this reformist left-wing movement that wanted a slight relief of the absolute misery that people were living under, and was really a popular democratic movement. And these accusations were used very cynically to destroy this movement, and very successfully. So these are all ideas that like I and others have been thinking about and grappling with for a long time, but there's some of these pieces are doing a really excellent job at actually taking that analysis and really making it a lot easier to understand the way these concepts work. I would say not only does it absolve the West of their anti-Semitism, it also shifts its anti-Semitism to a community with no history of anti-Semitism, the Arabs, to justify their colonization. Yeah, I mean, even Netanyahu has engaged in this kind of thing, like saying like Hitler didn't want to do the Holocaust. It was just the Arabs that decided, the Arabs told Hitler to do it. Like, it's fucking psychotic. Soyprem a couple moments ago said Sami Dun Prisoner Solidarity Network was sanctioned for allegedly being a PFLP front by the U.S. and Canada. Same day, Biden said to improve humanitarian conditions, a group that monitors prisoner conditions gets flagged as a bad actor. A group that monitors and prisoner conditions and advocates for prisoners in Palestine in a year when we've seen these like horrifying stories of the kind of like torture and sexual abuse and other horrifying conditions that prisoners in Palestine have been being subjected to. And that's not just over the last year. Over on this stream, we've looked at pieces from the fucking 70s which talk about this. It's been going on for decades and decades, as long as the occupation's been going on. And now we're simultaneously sanctioning this group that does advocacy work on behalf of these prisoners, while at the same time fully supporting Israel and also giving them this fake ultimatum about ending the humanitarian crisis, as they call it, which is really, as I discussed with Eric Sperling today on the podcast, a ploy to promote the exact same security pact and normalization deal with Saudi Arabia that the U.S. government has been trying to make happen for years and years and years, like prior to October 7th. So, yeah, all these things go hand in hand, and I would recommend people listen to that talk with Eric Sperling as well, because it was really good. I fear there will be further legislation in the coming year explicitly linking anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. I mean, it's happening on all these college campuses already. Like, they're already like passing these guidelines in response to these student encampments that we saw last year that like unequivocally equate these two things. And I think anyone should be concerned about this like situation with the Sami Dun Prisoner Solidarity Network. And the fact that more, it seems like any advocacy that anyone can do in the West to, advocate on behalf of Palestinians is going to be legally challenged in this way. Yeah, the IHRA definition adopted by the Ontario government, for example, this is happening all over, and it's alarming. Like when they use this designation of terrorism to shut down any possible organization that advocates for Palestinian people, to say nothing of like Palestinian armed struggle, which international law says that people have a right to do. But like there's a possible terrifying future that is like a lot more realistic than I think some people want to let on. That like once they start using this terrorism designation, there's all kinds of people that could be caught up in that. People that have advocated for Palestinians through these kinds of organizations or in their private communications, whatever it is. It's really scary. It's a really scary climate. Hello, ML Thoughtism. How is it going? And hello, Blurp Blurp as well. So I don't know, what else do we have here? I did see there's a breakthrough news video about Iran. I might have time to throw that on. Let's see what we have here in terms of video content. I've been doing a lot of yapping. Let's see what we have there. Just one moment, chat. Just talk amongst yourselves. Breakthrough News has been pretty great. Glad I was turned on to them from here. Well, yeah, I mean, they've been a really valuable resource on this and a number of other topics. And also, like, I think anyone that works in this kind of organization should be kind of concerned the way that, like, this kind of crackdown on speech and this kind of idea of like a Russian disinformation, the way that like, or Chinese disinformation or Iranian disinformation, the way that like people like Hillary Clinton are advocating that like news organizations that promote what they deem as this kind of misinformation can be arbitrarily shut down. We've seen that a lot on YouTube. We've seen this effort like in the mainstream press in the West to like frame, like the Answer Coalition and some of these like anti-war groups as being part of some devious Chinese propaganda operation, the way TikTok is being targeted like this. Like, I really genuinely wonder how much longer we're going to have access to this kind of information before these tech companies do what the United States government wants them to do and just blocks it all and only promotes a specific pro-Western viewpoint. Like, it's genuinely so psychotic the way that like any deviation from that pro-Western narrative has now just falls under this purview of like Russian or Chinese or Iranian disinformation. You saw like African nationalism, like Pan-Africanism is being disrupted in this way. That whole Africa Streams network is being blocked as being for Russian disinformation. Like anything that remotely goes against the like pro-Western narrative or that challenges colonialism or imperialism in any way is being framed as being this kind of like pro-Russian or pro-Chinese or pro-Iranian propaganda. Red's not that big, but it was big enough for Blinken to make note and have them banned on YouTube. Yeah, I wonder how much longer we're going to see outlets like Breakthrough News on there. This looks like a good video with a friend of the show, John Elmer. We are honored to be... Who is someone else that I should probably get back on here. It's been a year since John Elmer and Justin Potter was on the show, which is nightmarish considering that we spoke in November and we're coming up on a year ago and this genocide is still ongoing. That was one of my favorite conversations that I've done on this program, so it would be good to get him to come back, and Justin as well. As I've mentioned a couple times, I am going to be hosting a panel in Toronto with Justin Potter on Friday, November 8th, 9th, Saturday the 9th. Obviously, I knew that. Definitely. It's on Saturday the 9th in Toronto. I'm going to have more info about that soon. Yes, there's programming Friday night, and it's going to be all day Saturday, this event. But I would like to get both Justin and John to come back on this show as well, because I do enjoy talking to both of them. Did you see Dimitri Ellis in Lebanon? It would be cool to have him back on. Yeah, it would be good to have Dimitri back on as well. Anyway, here's a shorter video from Breakthrough News with John Elmer joining all former guests of this show, John Elmer and Eugene Poirier and Rania Khalek. They all need to come back. Anyway, here it goes.
We are honored to be joined here by John Elmer, who is a contributing editor at the Electronic Intifada. John, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thanks for having me back again.
Well, I have to say, and thank you. It's really a pleasure. Here we are. At least according to the Israelis, which means that there may be more, 3 soldiers killed in this incursion into Jabalia camp. But, this is the area of North Gaza that they've been saying for 6 months now has been completely controlled by Israel. Hamas has been completely destroyed. And yet and still it seems that they're facing very stiff resistance from all the other resistance factions. Give us a sense of what you think the real balance of forces is here, because it really does seem that what Israel is saying just doesn't seem to ring true with what we keep hearing in terms of the attacks by the resistance on their forces.
Yeah, Israel said they had operational control over Jabalia in November. They went back in May and got smoked again in May. And then they went back in this weekend and they've been hit by 50 qualitative operations since Sunday. Another dozen today from all factions, but particularly from the Qassam brigades. The National Army is still able to meet the Israelis wherever they are. The division that went into Jabalia is the division that just left Rafah. When they left Rafah on the last days they were in Rafah, they got hit on the last days of a 5-month invasion of Rafah. They drive their tanks up, 20 miles up the desert and pull into Jabalia and get hit by 50 operations in 72 hours. So the resistance is fierce. It's still there. And Israel's targeting civilians. Their justification, the IDF told Army Radio that the reason for the invasion of Jabalia is because people were going to the shelters, the school shelters, and getting food stamps and getting humanitarian equipment and humanitarian aid. And they were coming there to report crime. So basic elementary governmental organization is the justification for Israel to evacuate the only 3 hospitals that are left at gunpoint, chasing people out with armed quadcopter drones, burning the warehouse with the flour, the last flour in the north. The people in the north have been living through brutal conditions for these last 12 months. Just unspeakable what we're witnessing. And, Ronnie has said it too. It's just, you don't even know what to say at this point. Other than to say that the people are resilient and courageous, and the way that they have met this invasion, this re-invasion for the 3rd time in Jabalia, is exactly the same way they've met every single incursion by the Israeli military in this 12 months. There's no sign of any kind of defeat or dismantling of any of these formations of Hamas, whether we're talking about sanitation workers, healthcare workers, teachers, the people that work in the ministries, the doctors. They've attempted to dismantle every single hospital in the Gaza Strip, all 36 of them, often multiple times, and they're going back into the north to do it again. Every time they do it, the Palestinians rebuild the hospital immediately. The second the Israelis are gone, the doctors themselves, the healthcare workers themselves are in there. The community is in there cleaning up the schools, cleaning up the hospitals, and making the situation livable again. The courage and resilience in the face of this just frankly disgusting operation by the Israelis, with no red lines, with a complete international community, not only acceptance, but $20 billion in U.S. aid that we just found out the other day. AP reported $20 billion in a year, which is like 7 times more than the already grotesque amount of money that this rich country gets in military aid. While there's disasters all over the United States, while there's actual real humanitarian contributions that they could make worldwide, they choose to spend the money on bombs that are being dropped on civilians. They're just attacking civilians because they can't defeat the resistance.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the other front Israel has now escalated in, and that is the Lebanon front. John, the Israelis for about a week now, I think it's been a week, have been doing these ground incursions, these kind of raids where they sort of jump in a few hundred meters into Lebanon and take some photo ops, get into some fights with Hezbollah and then leave. I guess it seems like maybe they're testing the waters. They haven't really unleashed a ground invasion quite yet, but they seem to be definitely moving towards that direction. It stands to be seen when that will happen, but I'm curious if you can explain to us from the military side of things, because I think over the last 3 weeks since the pager attacks, Hezbollah has had to absorb one
What's up, Brandon?
Pretty devastating blow after another, the elimination of its entire senior military leadership, the assassination of Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, which was a huge loss for not just the organization, but for the country of Lebanon. And also, of course, the now carpet bombing campaign across South Beirut and across the entirety of southern Lebanon that has created just severe displacement. Over 1.2 million people displaced from their homes. The attempts by the U.S. and Israel to ignite a civil war in Lebanon using the same sort of fascistic forces that they've used to do that in the past. This is really catastrophic nightmare scenario for Lebanon. And of course, it can still get worse. But with all that said, I think the mentality among people both against the resistance and even in some cases for the resistance, there's a sentiment of Hezbollah's really weakened, and this is a really scary moment for those in that community, in the resistance community, because they feel unprotected. That said, Hezbollah is still operating. Their command and control seems to be back in place. Tell us about that. Tell us about where Hezbollah's at and what their capabilities seem to be based on what we've witnessed over the past week of ground incursions, and also Hezbollah launching over 100 missiles every single day at Israel.
Yeah, there's no question losing that leadership was devastating. It's shocking. Nasrallah is a world historical figure. It's a devastating loss. But the assassination of senior echelon military commanders does not impact the readiness of the force on the ground to meet the ground invasion should it come. Now, we saw that on the first day when the 98th Division of the IDF, the division that had run roughshod over Gaza, attacking Shifa Hospital, creating mass graves outside Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis, they put their toenails across the border and they get 9 dead and they pull back. And that's what we're seeing, and you described it correctly. They're tiptoeing across the border, taking some photos, planting a flag, and then quickly running away with it because the resistance is ready for this. And losing senior commanders, it hurts. There's no question about it. The institutional knowledge of that leadership tier, especially the founding generation, but Hezbollah is able to replace that leadership, and they're able to do that almost immediately. And there might be a period of time to get their footing in the senior echelons, but on the front lines, that's not how they fight. They're not waiting for a command from Beirut to defend the southern villages. They are trained in small unit tactics. They're able to fight disconnected from, should they be disconnected from that leadership, they're able to fight and defend their country. And they've prepared for this battle for 18 years. Losing, as devastating as it is, losing that leadership that they have lost, that doesn't affect the readiness of the organization to confront the invasion. And what we're seeing right now is Israel trying to shape the battlefield to see how they can move forward. And there's no reason at this point for Hezbollah to run forward and attack from their positions. Israel has to come up the hill. They have to come up the mountain. Sun Tzu said, don't fight uphill. And that's what the Israelis have to do. It's a serious battle if that's what they're willing to do. I think it won't go well for Israel, and it will be devastating for Lebanon. There's no question about that. And that's why Hezbollah plays it safe. Hezbollah has played it responsible. They're not trying to pull their country, who they are deeply embedded in that country, in the social fabric of that country. They're not just trying to throw that country into an open war just so that they can be seen to be retaliating instantly for a perceived transgression. You have to take the long view of this, and I think in the long view of this, Hezbollah will be fine. There's no question those were devastating losses. The loss of Nasrallah, to Hezbollah, to Lebanon, and to many cases to large parts of the world. It was a devastating loss, but that doesn't affect the readiness of an organization that for 18 years has been preparing for this exact moment. All of these Israeli divisions that are situated all across the border.
It's always really comforting hearing John's analysis of this.
They're all coming in through pathways that Hezbollah understands and are waiting for them, whether they're waiting for them at the 100-meter mark or the 1 kilometer mark. That's what time will tell. But there's no reason to believe that Hezbollah should run forward at the first sign of Israeli troops on the border. And that's why I think Israel's playing it very safe. And they're not saying that they're going to destroy Hezbollah. They're
playing it safe, except continually bombing villages and continuing to bomb apartment complexes and hospitals and schools and civilians, because that's the only thing that they're good at doing, not fighting in an actual war against soldiers.
It's delimited, it's targeted, and they're trying to essentially change the equation because Hezbollah has shrunk the country of Israel since October 8th, creating a de facto 30-kilometer buffer zone, security zone, as Israel would call it, inside Israel.
Yeah,
Israel is a much smaller country
exactly.
today than it was on the 7th of October at 6:30 in the morning when the Qassam brigades raided their military positions and humiliated and dismantled the Gaza division. It's a considerably smaller country that's in a lot poorer shape than it was a year ago, despite the brutal, unspeakable daily catastrophe that we're watching on civilian populations.
You know, it brings me to another question, maybe connecting the two fronts and, you know, thinking about this sort of asymmetrical warfare, as everyone calls it, that I think is notable. But looking at what's happening in Gaza, what, you know, is starting up and continuing in Lebanon, you know, even the way Yemen is operating. I mean, you know, so much of the propaganda is, well, these are all Iranian proxies, right? So, like, if Iran can't ship them 1 million bullets tomorrow or something, they'll all collapse. But it does seem that from my point of view, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, you know, in Gaza, and I think this may be borne out in Lebanon, I think it's borne out in Yemen, that the sort of indigenous production, like the proliferation of knowledge of how to produce things as opposed to just shipping weapons and missiles, has introduced a very difficult factor for the Israelis to address, because I think they were hoping if we just siege them out and, you know, we control Rafah and they can't sneak things through tunnels, they'll just immediately collapse. But that there was this resiliency built in many of these places, that they are, you know, maybe not totally self-reliant, but significantly self-reliant, and thus able to last significantly longer than I think perhaps Israel or the U.S. had expected.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Gaza, they're almost completely self-reliant. The Israeli 162nd Division that was in Rafah digging for tunnels along the Philadelphia corridor for 5 months, they said they didn't find a single active tunnel. If you look at the battle videos that Qassam puts out virtually every single day, you're not seeing imported, smuggled weaponry. You're seeing indigenously built weaponry. The case for Hezbollah is a little bit different. They have a land corridor between Iran that has been able to arm them, but that's the same situation. They're not proxies. They're not waiting for a call from Iran to do something or not do something. They're Iranian allies, and Iranians have shared military know-how with Hezbollah. Hezbollah has shared military know-how with the Iranians, and the same with the Palestinians. They've transferred knowledge. They've watched each other fight. Hezbollah and the Palestinians have been exchanging knowledge back 2 generations. So that's to call them proxies is a smear, and I think probably most of your viewers know that.
And yeah, of course, you can't call Israel or any of these U.S. proxies U.S.-backed or U.S. proxies. And this is something also that Eric Sperling on the podcast today pointed out. I'm just going to plug that one more time. It was a very good talk with Eric Sperling of Just Foreign Policy. You know, he mentioned this as well. Like, you can talk about Hezbollah or Hamas or some of these militia groups in Syria or Iraq or whatever. And yeah, it's like they are backed by Iran. I don't think anyone's disputing that. They, like John's pointing out, they share knowledge and information, intelligence. You know, they arm them to whatever extent is possible. But like, Iran-backed militias in Syria are Syrian, and Iraqi militia groups that are backed by Iran are Iraqi. And you know, in Lebanon, they're Lebanese. In Palestine, they're Palestinian. So this whole Iran-backed thing as well, it kind of delegitimizes the fact that the people that are actually part of these militias and part of these organized resistance groups are actually indigenous to these regions and these communities. Like, they're not these outside foreign actors that are just showing up. You know, they're comprised of people that actually live in the region and have a vested interest in being part of the resistance in that region.
It's a smear. The Israelis are far more of a proxy than Hezbollah is. Hezbollah is deeply integrated in their society. For sure, Lebanon is not as unified a body politic as Gaza, but once Lebanon is being defended by Hezbollah, I think you're going to find a unity that you might not see in these fearful moments before the invasion, when people are rightly afraid and should be afraid. What the record of Israel's crimes and the inability of the international community, quote unquote, to do anything about it is terrifying to people, and that's legitimate. But when it comes time, I think you're going to see resilience and courage step forward like we have in Gaza. And I think the Israelis are not so sure about this invasion of Lebanon. And I think if they had an ounce of self-preservation in their genocidal rampage that they're on, I think that they would be taking a second thought about an open war with Hezbollah. I think it's a war that they could lose very easily.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so
go ahead, please.
Well, real quick, I just have one last thing I want to ask you about, because we've kind of covered we've covered the Palestinian resistance and the shape there, and we've covered the Lebanese resistance and the shape there. And so, on the note of Israel, I mean, they have been fighting. They've been fighting, they've been carrying out a genocide, but they also have been fighting battles for the last year. And after a year of that, they're going into an even more difficult terrain, should they choose to really do their ground invasion in Lebanon. So I'm just curious, what shape is the Israeli military? And after all of this, I mean, these aren't immortal beings who don't die or who don't get tired, and they have been fighting in Gaza for the last year.
Yeah, well, the Israeli military says that they're battle hardened and they're the most trained division that they sent up there, the 98th Division. The 98th Division couldn't take Khan Yunis, a flat desert place. For 5 months. They fought in Khan Yunis and they couldn't take it. They couldn't find tunnels. They couldn't find Sinwar. They said Mohammed Deif was in Khan Yunis. They couldn't defeat the resistance in Khan Yunis on flat land that has been besieged for 18 years. And they send that division, after fighting in Gaza for 10 months, they send them up to the border and say that they're their most trained fighters. Just to think back to what Nasrallah said, like,
the most experienced 22-year-old lieutenant generals you'll find
anywhere. Is this
anywhere.
the army you're sending? Because if it is, I would be, if I was Israel, I would be urging caution. And I don't know if that's what the Americans are doing. But they have considerably less hardware. Their tanks have been damaged. They're going to enter vertically.
They're going to leave horizontally.
Their morale is probably high right now after the series of intelligence victories from their point of view. The morale may be high, but it won't take long to bring them down to earth. And I think the 98th Division that you're looking at on the B-roll on the screen there, they didn't get very far into Lebanon before their special forces unit took considerable casualties, and their medevac muster points are being targeted in Lebanon by Hezbollah, which they weren't in Gaza by the Palestinians. So that's an interesting thing to note, because it's difficult to imagine the way that they're going to handle mass casualties if it's under fire. I really think it's a scary moment for civilians in Lebanon. Nobody wants to see their country destroyed. Israel's on a genocidal rampage, but the resistance is a formidable force. And if Israel's really planning on a ground invasion, it's going to be a long and brutal battle that I don't see Israel doing well in that battle, to be totally honest.
No, I think it's a very well taken point, and I think that you are doing fantastic breakdowns on all of this and more on a very regular basis at the Electronic Intifada, so I hope everyone is checking that out. John Elmer, as always, thanks so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Great stuff as always. Again, I got to get John Elmer to come back on this program, because I really appreciate his analysis on this. There's a reason why they're going into Lebanon without a stated goal. Whatever they do, they'll claim victory, even if they retreat with their tail between their legs. Well, and this is part of the strategy as well. And this is something that I think is really valuable from the conversation I just had with Eric Sperling about this. This is the deal that they're trying to sell. This ceasefire deal, which really is just like this Saudi normalization deal. They just want Israel to collectively punish civilians enough that they can sell Palestinians on this idea of maybe getting this like demilitarized state in whatever borders are left over, these demilitarized state that's being administered by U.S. trained Saudi security forces, and saying in exchange, the collective punishment will stop, the violence will stop, and then Saudi Arabia is going to be able to go into Gaza and build a bunch of housing and build a bunch of infrastructure, and people won't be suffering anymore. There's going to be food, there's going to be water, there's going to be amenities, and there's going to be this kind of development that happens in this demilitarized state being managed by the US and Saudi Arabia. That is the deal that's being offered right now. That's what the Biden administration is saying when they say we want to stop this humanitarian crisis in the next 30 days. We want to make this deal. That's what it is. It's you get the collective punishment can stop finally, unequivocal surrender of all kind of armed resistance, and finally you're going to allow Saudi's going to come in there and build infrastructure in exchange for a security pact with the U.S. where once you join this kind of this anti-Iran, anti-China, anti-Russian alliance, you're going to have full security backing of the U.S. no matter what the consequences are. You're going to have access to even better weapons than you were getting before, that weren't possible before. So that's what they're selling the Saudis on, and that's what they're selling the Israelis and the Palestinians on as well. And like Eric was saying, there's, even with the cynical and twisted logic of that, there's a chance that it might work. Maybe there's just people have been dealt with so much misery and violence that's going to seem like an appealing offer to them, and it's like you can stop worrying about being bombed and displaced. You can stop being food insecure. You can have development. You just have to renounce any kind of armed resistance. You have to fully renounce Hamas or any of these resistance groups. And maybe there's going to be people that are going to be okay with that. It's hard for me to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine that that's going to be the case, but that is the deal. That is what is being offered right now on the part of the U.S. As a Palestinian, Saudis are not an appealing offer to anyone but a tiny portion of people. I mean, it's hard to imagine, right? It's hard to imagine that anyone's going to be like, oh, the people that have been doing this, the United States and Israel, they're going to be the ones to administer this state, this complete it's like not even pretense of having any kind of democratic legitimacy. So the U.S., which has been supplying all these bombs and promoting this genocide, they're going to be overseeing this along with Saudi Arabia. It's hard to see that having a lot of purchase amongst this population, but at the same time, the people have been collectively punished in the most horrifying ways for the last year. Maybe there will be people that will just say, this just needs to stop, It's hard to even imagine living through that for one day, let alone the last year, let alone the last 75 years or whatever it is. So I think that's the cynical, sick calculation. We're just going to keep collectively punishing them until they take this deal and allow this non-democratic, demilitarized state to exist that's going to be administered by Saudi security forces in the United States. And the other big part of that calculation as well is Israel, which they don't even seem to have any appetite for even that. They certainly don't have an appetite for an actual democratic Palestinian state. I don't even think they have appetite for this fantasy version of what the Palestinian state would even look like, this demilitarized, non-democratic version. I don't think there's any appetite for that. But I think that's the case that Eric was making as well, which is that Israel just can't survive like this into the future, that they do need to have this kind of deal. They need to have this protection pact with the US and Saudi Arabia. So there is maybe some appetite on the part of Israeli society for that, but it doesn't seem like Netanyahu has any interest in it. And who knows if there's anyone that's actually remotely connected to the establishment that's willing to listen to this. Anyway, I really do recommend that conversation with not John Elmer. That was what we just watched. That was fantastic, obviously, and I'm going to link that once again. But conversation with Eric Sperling on the Insurgents podcast today was really good stuff.
As the official.
And meanwhile, this is what's been ongoing since this entire time, what the U.S. and Canada and its allies are fully backing. There's a piece from Democracy Now! Talking to some of these doctors about these children that are being routinely shot in the head in Gaza. And this is their peace deal. This is what it is. This is going to keep happening until you take this deal. Take this deal. Take your non-democratic, demilitarized, pretend state, which is administered by Saudi Arabia. Allow them to come in there and build infrastructure, or you're just going to keep getting this. That's the deal that's on the table for Palestinians right now.
Toll in Gaza passes more than 42,400. The true number may be impossible to know until Israel's war is over. But medical workers who witnessed the carnage in Gaza's hospitals are speaking out. We begin today's show with a surgeon who volunteered at the European Hospital in Khan Yunis and wrote a devastating opinion piece in the New York Times, headlined 65 Doctors, Nurses, and Paramedics, What We Saw in Gaza. In a minute, we'll be joined by Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who begins the piece writing, quote, I worked as a trauma surgeon in Gaza from March 25th to April 8th. I volunteered in Ukraine and Haiti. I grew up in Flint, Michigan. I've seen violence and worked in conflict zones. But of the many things that stood out about working in a hospital in Gaza, one got to be nearly every day I was there, I saw a new young child who'd been shot in the head or the chest, virtually all of whom went on to die, 13 in total. At the time, I assumed this had to be the work of a particularly sadistic soldier located nearby. But after returning home, I met an emergency medicine physician who'd worked in a different hospital in Gaza 2 months before me. I couldn't believe the number of kids I saw shot in the head, I told him. To my surprise, he responded, yeah, me too, every single day, he said. The piece quotes dozens of healthcare workers and includes 3 X-rays or CT scans of pediatric patients who were shot in the head or the...
This is classic New York Times doing this story after the last year of the genocide that they've fully been supporting through their media, through their journalism. And then when it's too late, that's when they start talking about this.
Left side of the chest. The person who provided the scans was Dr. Mimi Saed, who works in Khan Yunis from August 8th to September 5th, and said the children usually arrived at the hospital either dead or in critical condition after suffering a single shot. On Tuesday, the New York Times opinion section editor issued a statement refuting claims circulating online that the images were altered, saying the editors had, quote, photographs to corroborate the CT scan images, but, quote, because of their graphic nature, we decided these photos of children with gunshot wounds to the head or neck were too horrific for publication. For more, we're joined by Dr. Feroz Sidwa, the trauma and general surgeon who wrote this piece. He also spearheaded
Hamas has
an open
infiltrated
letter to
the
President
NYT.
Biden
I
and
know,
Vice
it's very
President
scary.
Harris, signed by
Scary
99
situation.
U.S. medical professionals who served in Gaza, testifying to the unprecedented scale of the healthcare catastrophe and calling for an immediate ceasefire and the end to all U.S. support for Israel. We are also joined in Chicago by Raja Musla, the country representative in Gaza of Med Global, a medical humanitarian aid group. She previously worked as a nurse at Al Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Dr. Feroz Sidwa, let's begin with you. Thank you for joining us in the studio. We heard from you in Gaza and spoke to you right when you came out. This is very significant, this New York Times op-ed. First, that the Times agreed to run it, and then the controversy around it, what they published and what they didn't publish. Tell us the story.
Yeah, the Times piece was interesting. Actually, the opinion section reached out, the visual opinion team reached out to me and asked me to write the piece. So we came up with the idea together, and that was after we wrote an open letter, like you mentioned, we wrote one in October, but we also wrote one in July to the Biden administration. That was when the Times reached out to me and said, can we get...
Dave Legend, thanks for the raid. Hello. Welcome, Raiders. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. How was the Dave Legend stream? Welcome in, Raiders. Hello.
Get information about exactly who wrote or who saw what in Gaza. So we did. We designed a poll. I got everybody to answer it that I could, and we went on from there. the controversy that you mentioned about the images is just manufactured nonsense. It's no connection to reality whatsoever. These pictures there's no reason to doubt them at all. Furthermore, I've seen the full CT scans. I've seen the photos of the actual wounds on the children. It's not surprising. These were common injuries.
It's just so horrifying.
Almost everybody saw the same thing. Everybody saw kids get shot in the head. Almost everybody saw severely malnourished children. It seems like the piece has had an effect. It seems like it's making its way around, and people are seeing it, and they're kind of horrified by what they see, which they should be.
And then talk about the whole issue of whether to show the dead or dying children and their injuries.
Yeah, so that was never. So in the piece,
the most moral army in the world.
Never part of the plan, I guess you would say. But once all this nonsense about people saying the images are faked came out, the New York Times, I guess and I wasn't involved in that decision at all, but they had to decide whether or not to put, the picture they're talking about. She's probably a 4 or 5 year old girl. Her eyes are closed. She has a breathing tube down, and she has a bullet wound right here. There's some brain matter that you can see on her hair. I'm a trauma surgeon, so I'm used to seeing things like that, but I can understand what they mean when they say that they're too horrific to publish. I personally wish that Americans could see more of what it looks like.
They should be publishing it.
Is shot in the head when a child is filleted open by bombs. I think it would make us think a little bit more about what we do in the world.
Did the Times also do a news
We're
piece
sponsoring
on this,
it.
given the level of the video, of the scans you had, the pictures you had?
Yeah, we collected a lot of documentary evidence from people from healthcare workers who'd been in Gaza quite a bit, and all of them have quite a bit more. Everyone takes a lot of photographs and videos and things like that when they're there, and they're all date and location stamped. They're not faked. I don't know if the Times news section has reached out to other people because their names are mostly public. I don't know if they've reached out to them or not for specific comment about specific things. I have been contacted by, I don't think I'm exaggerating if I say dozens of journalists since coming back from Gaza, news journalists saying that we want to publish about the children being shot in the head, the extent of malnutrition, especially small infants dying of malnutrition and dehydration. And they all say that
I think you got to publish these pictures. It is upsetting. Obviously, it's upsetting. That's the whole point. This is what America's been sponsoring for the last year and for the last 75 years. It's not like this is a new phenomenon. Israel shooting kids. It's their entire existence. That's what they've been doing. And New York Times readers should be aware that it's their own government and their precious Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration that's been sponsoring this. Not only sponsoring it, but bending over backwards diplomatically to ensure they have the right to continue to do it.
They need a way of just kind of overwhelming their editors' skepticism. They need just a humongous mass of evidence. So, I know. Shouldn't name them, but I know journalists at the Post, at the Times, at BBC, the Washington Post, yes, who've been working on such stories for months, but still not out, despite having massive amounts of evidence.
Dr. Sid, what is the implication of so many children being shot in the head, when you would assume that if children are, as the Israelis claim, unfortunate collateral damage of their bombing attempts to kill militants in Gaza, what does this mean to you that so many children have been found to be shot in the head?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, excuse me. So, as physicians and nurses, we can't say that this particular child or that particular child was shot on purpose.
They sure got screams without words quick.
Else.
That's true,
That's
yeah.
not what we can possibly do. We're not war crimes investigators. But I think it's pretty clear that when there's a pattern of, in the catchment area of every hospital in Gaza, every time any international has been around, for an entire year, on a daily basis, a child has been shot in the head in a place of 2 million people. It seems unlikely to me that that's an accident. If you look at the differential of killing between Ukraine and Israel, it depends on what day you calculate it, but the differential is literally hundreds of times. The rate of
Putin
killing of
propaganda.
children in Gaza is hundreds of times higher than it is in Ukraine. So it's very hard for me to believe that this is just a byproduct of a war that's being fought in otherwise just ways. I find that hard to believe.
And you mentioned other battles and other wars. Your experience in those other war zones. What is the difference from what you see aside from the children being shot in the head? Other specific differences between what's happening in Gaza and what you've seen in other places?
Well, there's a few. One is the massive level of destruction. Not only have the hospitals been attacked, the universities, it's getting down to the level of destroying the water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure, and concentrating an entire population on the Mawasi area, which is basically just the beach of Gaza. Oxfam wrote a report where they estimated that when there were 500,000 people in the Mawasi area, there was one toilet for every 4,130 people there. That's just totally outrageous. I mean, those numbers don't exist anywhere else on the planet. Now there might be a million. Nobody really knows how many people have been pushed to the Mawasi, but these are just totally outrageous numbers. So you have a largely child population. Gaza's very young. It's been incredibly concentrated. It's been starved for a year. And the winter rains are coming, which are going to lift, all the sewage and everything up out of the ground. Every sewage plant has been destroyed. 90% of the water, sanitation, and hygiene infrastructure has been destroyed, and the healthcare system has been destroyed. So, yeah, that's pretty unique in my experience.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask you. You recently were supposed to speak at Columbia Medical School, but your event was canceled at the last minute. Could you talk about what happened?
Yeah.
Can't allow this man to speak at Columbia Medical School. This kind of Hamas sympathizer.
But yeah,
Putin
I was
propagandist.
invited with Adam Hamawi, who is an American veteran and a plastic and reconstructive surgeon, and Dr. Mark Perlmutter, who is a orthopedic and hand surgeon, a Jewish American. I think he's been on Democracy Now! He's definitely been on Democracy Now! Before. And Lana, whose last name I just can't pronounce, who's a surgical nurse who also was working in Gaza, and she was actually one of the first internationals to go into Gaza. We had a medical talk planned. It was a technical exercise in surgical and medical care in an extremely difficult setting. It wasn't a political talk, but the organizers were smart. They recognized that it was very likely to be canceled at the last minute. It was canceled as we walked in the building, from what I can tell, and so they had organized a bookstore down the street to be available, so smart on their part. It's not surprising, but I think it's pretty shameful, to be perfectly honest.
I wanted to bring in addition to Dr. Feroz Sidwa, Raja Musla, who is the country representative in Gaza of the medical humanitarian aid group Med Global. Earlier this year, she worked as a nurse at Al Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. She's currently joining us from Chicago. Raja, thank you so much for being with us. You sheltered Al Shifa, and of course, the head of Al Shifa Hospital was arrested by the Israeli military. Can you describe what the situation was like then, when you were there, and what you understand as you deal with Gaza every day, even as a nurse in Chicago, is happening now and what you're calling for?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Sorry, actually, I have trapped at Shifa Hospital for more than 40 days. And what I'm witnesses in this period, actually, I can describe it as crimes because we receive at the hospital a huge number of injured persons coming to the emergency department, and the majority of the cases, unfortunately, women and children. And the massive of the injured for these cases was severe. It is the first time.
Like John Elmer's pointing out, they can't actually defeat Hezbollah or invade Lebanon without getting absolutely smoked. They're great at doing this, though, so that when they just revert back to doing this when it comes down to it.
Of my whole life, I'm witness this kind of injury. Many people or many children come without legs, without arms, and even I'm witness a father hold his children in 2 bags. This is the first time of my life I'm witness the severity of the bombing that using during this war. The situation on Shifa Hospital was
And I just want to also just contrast when we hear horror stories like this, contrast that with that guy from the New York Post today in that podcast interview we were listening to, talking about Jews are like they're even more so than black people. They're the victims of like Jim Crow, but even worse in America now, like the victimization of people like that and Shai Davidi and whoever else. Meanwhile, this is what Israel is doing. This is what these student encampments at Columbia and elsewhere are trying to stop. And you have people like that acting like they're the ultimate victims of it. It's just so cynical and absolutely depraved.
And very, very bad. There's no access to food because there's more than 80,000 IDPs inside the Shifa Hospital. There's no electricity. They cut the electricity, they cut the water, and the situation was very bad. One of the cases that I will never, ever forget it, for a girl, her age is 10 years, she was completely burned. 9% of her body was burned, and she asked me to stay beside her and hold her hand until the moment. I will never, ever forget her burned skin at my hands. Until the moment I feel that. Until the moment I feel guilty because I did not obey or stay beside her in the bed because she requested that, and I did not do that. Until the moment I feel guilty when she asked me about her mother and father and sister, brothers, and I cannot respond to her request because the whole family has been killed during bombing her house. I will never forget the dogs were eating the dead body inside Shifa Hospital at the front of the emergency department. This will be stuck on my mind for the whole life. I will never, ever forget a boy. After the operation, his leg has been amputated, and he asked me to move his leg. What I should respond for a kid, his age is 9 years, when he asked
my son's
me
age.
Just move my leg. I pretend that I move his leg, and I'm ask him, is that okay? He said yes. In this moment, I feel like my heart is broken because the suffering of my people inside Shifa Hospital and in the whole Gaza Strip. Now the situation on the ground, I'm receive calls from my colleague from the north of Gaza. There's no access to food, no access to water, no access to fuel for the hospitals to operate the centers or to operate the hospitals here in North Gaza. The situation is very, very critical. I'm here in Chicago just to send my people message. We need ceasefire now. We need ceasefire now. Enough is enough. More than 1 year, and the people inside Gaza suffering from and taste many types of death. Enough is enough. 365 days, and the people inside Gaza taste all kind of death. I'm witness the horrible of this war. I'm witness 4 wars before, and this war is completely different. The death everywhere, the suffering everywhere. The people just eat one time. They save the food for the children, and the children suffering from malnutrition inside Gaza. my message for the whole world, we are a human being. We are not numbers. We have the right to receive health care inside Gaza. We have the right to rise up our children. We have the right to return back our lives, our dignity. We have the right to rebuild our universities, our schools. We are a human being, and we are not numbers.
Absolutely harrowing. Like, it's just unbelievable. Like, Unelectable Airwave says, I feel like in any other country you'd have many of the soldiers unwilling to do these horrors. Yeah, and you have in Israel, some people that refuse to take part in this and join the IDF, but it seems like a relatively small number of people, which is indicative of something. And talking about this kind of self-victimization routine as well, PT Cut a couple minutes ago said, like, the Howard Jacobson types. This interview was very instructive as well, who call accurate reporting about Israel's horrific brutality on children a new blood libel. Yeah, they're making this case that, like, accurate reporting on Israel killing children is representing some kind of, like, anti-Semitic blood libel against Jewish people. And just no one thinks to say to Israel, like, maybe perhaps you should stop mass murdering children by the tens of thousands, and then there won't be any reporting about murdering children. You don't have to worry about it. But yeah, people with a straight face, like, to completely unironically making that case, that accurate reporting about this kind of violence against children is anti-Semitic, basically. It's just absolutely psychotic.
And Raja Musla, I wanted to ask you the interactions you had, if any, with the Israeli soldiers. How did they treat the medical personnel, especially those who had come from other countries?
Yeah, actually now we send the doctors from outside Gaza through Karm Abu Salim. But, they prevent the Palestinian people, even they are American, to enter Gaza. So all the people we send from outside Gaza go through Karm Abu Salim because of Rafah border now is completely closed.
And finally, Dr. Faraz Sidwa, as we hear this devastating description from Raja Musla, who worked at Al-Shifa and is a Palestinian-American nurse, comes from Gaza City. As you talk about the spaces being closed in this country, I mean, the lack of follow-up on your piece, when you try to speak at, for example, Columbia, it's shut down. You have to go to a local independent bookstore. And yet the Times did publish this column and what it's meant, the kind of response that you've gotten. You haven't stopped since you've come back as you organize with doctors and nurses and medical personnel to describe what's happening there. I also wanted to ask your response to the latest letter of the Biden administration saying if they don't improve the situation in Gaza, if Israel doesn't, the U.S. will cut off weapons, not this week or next week or the next week, but in a month.
Yeah, so I think the Times piece is significant in that it might represent a shift in elite opinion about just, like Raja said, enough is enough. I mean, how much more destroyed do they want Gaza to be? And that opens up some possibilities for us to be able to do things that can actually help the people of Gaza, and not just Gaza, but elsewhere as well. Like you mentioned, the Times of Israel, there was a letter leaked apparently to the Times of Israel that the Biden administration sent on Sunday, to Ron Dermer and Yoav Gallant, the strategic affairs and defense ministers in Israel, saying that Israel needs to start immediately, but has up to 30 days to improve the humanitarian situation. And they pointed out some interesting things in that letter.
And again, I'm sorry to keep promoting this. I mean, I guess it's the point of doing this show, but if you want to learn more about this this 30-day ultimatum that the Biden administration is offering right now and what is actually behind that, I would really recommend you listen to this conversation that I had with Eric Sperling from Just Foreign Policy about what that actually means, which is just really a rehashing. They're trying to force through this Saudi normalization deal, security pact, that the U.S. Multiple U.S. administrations have been trying to pursue for years and years now. So that's what's behind this ultimatum. If in case anyone's confused and thinking that there's some kind of new approach or new kind of shift in their foreign policy, there is not.
That in September, the lowest amount of aid that has that's gone into Gaza in the past year went in September, which means the least amount that has ever gone into Gaza. Of course, the Israelis will deny that, but it's nevertheless quite obviously true. And they raised the possibility of what they called consequences under NSM 20 and other American laws, meaning the laws that prevent the provision of arms to human rights abusers. Well, I think you played a Reuters journalist pointing out earlier, there's no reason to wait 30 days. It's not like Israel hasn't been attacking Gaza for a year. So this has been going on for, like Russia said, long enough. We can stop sending them arms tomorrow, and the U.S. can lead an arms blockade against not just Israel, but Israel and all Palestinian and Lebanese armed groups, and that can stop, or at least dramatically decrease, the fighting, the death, and the misery immediately.
Well, that was extremely harrowing. And again, it's like you have people accusing the New York fucking Times of being Hamas for just basically promoting this viewpoint about doctors and nurses who have been working in Gaza, just testifying that children are being deliberately murdered. I mean, it's like, I don't know what you're even supposed to say about that. Just a couple. Okay, I can't stick around too much longer. There's just a couple more things I wanted to take a look at just really quickly. This was a statement that came out today from by Ministers Jolie and Hussein on recent events in Middle East. And I just think it's like indicative of like Canada's completely incoherent views on this. It says the Honorable Melanie Jolie of Foreign Affairs, Honorable Ahmed Hussein, Minister of International Development, today issued the following statement. Canada is deeply disturbed by the recent events in the Middle East. The violence must stop and a diplomatic solution must be found before further human tragedy ensues. We urgently call for a ceasefire and the immediate release of hostages. Canada condemns the Israeli Defense Forces' increasing attacks on civilian infrastructure in northern Gaza, as well as its attacks on the United Nations interim force in Lebanon positions along the Blue Line. These are unacceptable and must immediately stop. The latest attacks on Al-Aqsa Hospital, the school in the Nuseirat camp, and a food distribution center have caused the deaths of dozens of civilians seeking refuge, including women and children. The increasingly dire humanitarian situation is unacceptable and continues to deteriorate due to a significant decrease of aid allowed into Gaza. An increase in humanitarian aid is desperately needed to end this suffering. The Palestinian civilian population has been displaced countless times with nowhere safe to go and is unable to meet its most basic needs. As this conflict escalates, it is civilians who continue to bear the brunt of the violence and suffer through its lasting consequences. We iterate our call for an immediate ceasefire, which is desperately needed to end this suffering in Gaza. We continue to strongly condemn Hamas's terrorist attacks against Israel. Canada also condemns Hezbollah's continued attacks on Israel. Hezbollah's ongoing and unprovoked attacks on Israel serve only to further destabilize the region. Canada calls for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. We condemn the killing of civilians in Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. We continue to insist that civilians be protected and not be inflicted with damage. We call on all parties to the conflict to uphold their obligations under international law to ensure the safety and security of civilians, as well as the protection of first responders and UNIFIL personnel at all times. And I just think that's amazing in our statement where we're actually condemning the IDF and condemning these assaults on Lebanese civilian infrastructure, and at the same time we condemn Hezbollah's ongoing and unprovoked attacks. Like, how does that make sense? That's completely incoherent. We're specifically calling out and condemning the IDF murdering women and children, targeting civilian infrastructure. We're condemning it. We're saying it has to stop, and then we call Hezbollah's response unprovoked. Like, these are mutually exclusive. You can't hold these two thoughts in your mind at the same time, that we're condemning these assaults on civilian infrastructure and we're calling these Hezbollah attacks unprovoked, which target military infrastructure in the same way that Iran's unprovoked attacks also targeted military infrastructure and not civilians. And we see countries like Canada trying to lump all this together. I just condemned the provocation, but Hezbollah's attacks are unprovoked. That's right. That's exactly it. And you got to wonder as well if Canada's statement about this today is kind of part of a further coordination with the United States, who have kind of stepped up their condemnations and offered this ultimatum. I think Canada's statement today probably is designed explicitly to further that and to help the U.S. out with that strategy, which once again is about forcing through this Saudi security pact and normalization deal. That's what this current shift in rhetoric is about that we're seeing. We've gone from outright support of Nazis into fence sitting. Major leaps and bounds being made in this regard. The rules-based order is back, baby. There's one more thing that I wanted to talk about here. This is kind of like a different subject. It is the anniversary of John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry today, which began this day in 1859. And I was sent this really cool and beautiful explanation by Malcolm X on why we don't learn about John Brown. So I just wanted to read this quote from Malcolm X about this. Malcolm X on white abolitionist John Brown. We need allies who are going to help us achieve a victory, not allies who are going to tell us to be nonviolent. And this is very, very pertinent to a lot of things that we have discussed today and every other day. You know, both about the treatment of racialized people, indigenous people here in the Imperial Core, and the people that are involved in organized resistance to imperialism around the world. If a white man wants to be your ally, what does he think of John Brown? You know what John Brown did? He went to war. He was a white man who went to war against white people to help free slaves. He wasn't nonviolent. White people called John Brown a nut. Go read the history. Go read what all of them say about John Brown. They're trying to make it look like he was a nut, a fanatic. They made a movie on it. I saw a movie on the screen one night. Why I would be afraid to get near John Brown if I go by what other white folks say about him. But they depict him in this image because he was willing to shed blood to free the slaves. And any white man who's ready and willing to shed blood for your freedom in the sight of other whites, he's nuts. As long as he wants to come up with some nonviolent action, they go for that. If he's liberal, a nonviolent liberal, a love everybody liberal. But when it comes time for making the same kind of contribution for your and my freedom that was necessary for them to make for their own freedom, they back out of the situation. So when you want to know good white folks in history where black people are concerned, go read the history of John Brown. That was what I call a white liberal, but these other kind, they're questionable. So if we need white allies in this country, we don't need those kind who compromise. We don't need those kind who encourage us to be polite, responsible, you know. We don't need those kinds who give us that kind of advice. We don't need those kind who tell us how to be patient. No, if we want some white allies, we need the kind that John Brown was, or we don't need you. And the only way to get those kind is to turn in a new direction. That's Malcolm X on John Brown. How much you know about Louis Riel? We know a little bit. We've talked about him quite a bit on this stream, Spooky Bert. Anyway, I thought that was a really great quote from Malcolm X on this day, the anniversary of the raid on Harper's Ferry. Louis Riel also slandered by history, of course. As Lenin tells us, this is what happens to any revolutionary figure. You know, they get slandered by history, or they get held up as heroes and avatars of like goodness and heroism after all that revolutionary potential has been kind of stripped away, and all their actual radical ideas, which were widely condemned at the time, is stripped away. Folks, I got to get going soon. I got to leave to go pick up my kid. I am at 10 out of 35 subs for the day. It's been a little bit of a messed up stream, had some technical issues, but I'm still here. So if you do support this program, folks, if you like tuning into this show each and every day, if you want to support the work that I do here on Twitch, talking about this and all these other issues, please subscribe if you can. The only way that I'm able to keep this show on the air, folks, is if the little number at the bottom of the screen goes up. You must help me with the little number. It's the only way that this community exists. So if you like being part of the community, you want to support this program, you want to support the work that I do on here,
just become an elite member.
Please do subscribe. It's very helpful. I appreciate it a lot. Top Scruffy, thank you for the 5 gifted subs. That's what I'm talking about. Very, very kind of you, Top Scruffy.
You can count
thank you for that.
You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you to Weejin29 as well for 10 months. Appreciate that. Anon, thanks for the 420. That's the weed number. We got multiple Robs on screen here. Wow.
Trans rights.
Trans rights, indeed. And spell check, thanks for the 31 months of tier 1. Very kind of you for that. The rare triple Rob on the screen. Yes, we do see it sometimes, but very rare. So we're halfway to the sub goal, folks. So remember, if you can, please do subscribe. We've had a number of very generous and brave heroes stepping forward in the last couple of minutes to support this program. If there's anyone else that would like to support this channel, please do if you can. Ziminyar, thank you for the gifted sub as well. It's a total of 4 gifted subs in the channel. Very close to being at the elite tier of the Friendship Triangle system. Thank you again to Ziminyar. We're halfway to the sub goal. There's still time for a few brave heroes to step forward and support this program. There's still time in case you were concerned that the time had been running out.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Irate Lump, thank you for the 46 months of Tier 1. That's so many months. That's like an insane amount of months. Thank you to Irate Lump for that. Very kind of you. We are at 19 out of 35 subs, friends. 19 out of 35. We're so close. Achingly close. Tantalizingly close to getting to the sub goal. Too many months. Well, tell me about it. Okay? Tell me about it. I've been on here 4 goddamn years of my life doing this. It's hard to imagine. But yes, we do have a hype train going here as well. It's at level 3. Do we hear level 4? Just another few gifted subs could do it. Please help support this program and help me make this little number at the bottom of the screen continue to go up. 16 little measly itty bitty subs to go to get there. And I think it can be done.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk
I think
you
it can
through
be
all
done.
this.
Lump sat alone in a buggy marsh. Good song. Good album, actually. Ziminyar, thank you for another gifted sub. Very kind of you. That's 5 gifted subs in the channel, making you an official elite member of the Friendship Triangle system. Thank you, Ziminyar. Thank you to Chris Barnes, 5,000 for the gifted sub, also at 4. So currently occupying the chaos zone there, Chris. 1 gifted sub away from the elite tier of the Friendship Triangle system. You still owe us a song. I know. Damn it. Maybe I'm getting to the point that I can do that. Maybe we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But a measly 14 subs to go, folks, to get to the goal. Can you believe it? Can you believe how close that is? I can't. He will sing again. Thank you. Yes, he will. In theory. Barnes, Tangent, saw Scotty had a good game. They beat the Celtics last night. He was hitting some he was from long distance. He was making some long range shots, which he needs to be really like unlock that next level of his game. Would be great to see some more of that this year. I still haven't watched the preseason. I will be watching the Raptors season when it starts, but I've not been watching the preseason. Please, for the love of God, someone drag this man's tired white ass across the finish line. Thank you, Dr. Maggot. I couldn't have said it better myself. Oh, wow. Rob is a fan of the presidents of the United States of America. That's right. I'm taking a reactionary turn, hoping that it's going to possibly be more lucrative. We got a minute 45 left of this hype train, folks. Pizzicata, thank you for the gifted sub. Very kind of you. I appreciate that. Thank you for that. My oldest loves that band, especially that Peaches song. It's a great song. Great song. I had the album back in the day, but I don't really remember the rest of the album, but I remember it being pretty good. Peaches is very good though, and so is Lump.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all
Millions
this.
of apples. Apples for Rob.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Anon, thank you for 3 gifted subs. Very, very kind of you.
You're going to have good old Rob
42 seconds left in this hype train. 96% of the way through level 3. Another small little gifted sub would get there.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to
there's a
talk you
perfect
through all
alley-oop
this.
in play for someone to come through with the classic 10 sub gift, which would get to the sub goal. The opportunity is there, and as Eminem famously asked us, like, what would you do when the opportunity is there? Would you take it? It was something like that, I think. I don't totally remember the exact words that he used, but it was something along those lines. The 10 sub slam dunk. The ball is hovering in the air, ready to be slammed home, and someone just needs to step up and do it. Would you capture it or let it slip? That's the question. We all have to ask ourselves sometimes. You know? When I win the lotto, I'll get some. I will hold you to that. As Eminem once said, his arms are heavy, knees weak, arms spaghetti. That's exactly right. And I think that's something that we can all apply to our daily lives, frankly. I believe that's the line, yes. So I'm going to get going, folks. I got to go pick up my kid from school. Thank you again for tuning in. It is still possible. You got about 50 seconds. Some brave hero can come through with the classic 10 sub gift alert to get to the sub goal. And in fact, I'm supremely confident that it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. In fact, I don't think I need to even say anything anymore. I'm just going to hang back and wait for that to roll in.